You'd think royalty would smell of roses and wisdom, but more often it was violets and vinegar, layered over a slow poison. I'm your bedtime historian, and tonight you'll drift through velvet chambers and perfume lies where beauty was a daily gamble with death. Funny how elegance always had a body count. A porcelain face wasn't just fashionable, it was performative purity. In the dim candlelight of Tudor courts or the morning glare of Ming palaces, pale skin wasn't merely admired, it was demanded. Skin so white it gleamed like porcelain wasn't achieved by rest or good health, but by concoctions brewed in secrecy and vanity. Why did they smear lead onto their cheeks? And why did the illusion outlive the truth? If knowing the truth makes your eyelids heavy, go ahead, give a quiet like and subscribe. No need for eyeliner, just let your algorithm rest easy. Do you have a favorite forgotten beauty trick? Maybe one that's less poisonous. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet crunch lightly on the powdered marble of a Florentine dressing chamber, where an ornate mirror stands tall, warped slightly with age. A queen leans in her hand, trembling slightly as she dabs a thick white paste along her cheeks. The scent is faintly floral roses, perhaps, but underneath is a sting of vinegar and something sharper, metallic, almost sweet. The mixture she uses, ceruse, is a blend of vinegar and white lead. It clings smoothly to her skin, hiding blemishes, scarring, and even illness. The effect is ethereal, ghostly even, and over time, quite literally deadly. Lead-based cosmetics weren't a fringe choice. They were endorsed, encouraged, and often given as gifts between noblewomen. In Elizabethan England, the Queen herself was rarely seen without her iconic white mask, made from the same poisonous blend. She set the trend. Nobles followed suit. Commoners aspired, though few could afford the risk or the cure. Historians still debate whether users of lead ceruse knew it was harmful. Some argue the increasing skin damage, tooth decay, and hair loss were accepted as side effects of status. Others believe the full extent of its danger was unknown, masked by superstition and vanity. Either way, daily use often led to chronic poisoning, deteriorating health, and death, disguised as beauty. And the effects weren't just physical. Skin whitened with lead was a signal, a social statement. It meant you didn't work in the sun, didn't toil, didn't sweat. In 16th century France, Spanish courts or Japanese palaces, to be pale was to be elite. To blush naturally was to be common. Some women even added touches of blue to suggest visible veins, delicate, noble, translucent. Oddly enough, the paler the face, the more effort it took to maintain. This led to multi-layered routines with lemon juice, peels, vinegar rinses, and lead powder touch-ups. Some applied crushed pearls. Others added a hint of crushed insect shell for that extra shimmer. They whispered secrets in boudoirs, traded recipes during salons, and measured status in layers of disguise. And still the mask cracked. Over time, the lead would degrade the very skin it aimed to perfect, causing pitting, bruising, and discoloration. So, they applied more, touched up more frequently, smiled less, lest the illusion flake. There's no scholarly consensus on how many deaths were directly caused by these creams, but letters from physicians' poems of heartbreak and satirical plays suggest the consequences were widely seen if not spoken of. So you find yourself watching the Queen once more. Her skin gleams under candlelight. She nods in the mirror, expression unreadable, before stepping into the grand hall. Applause, reverence, awe. No one sees the tremor in her hand or the redness around her eyes. They only see the whiteness, the perfect porcelain mask. And in that still moment, you wonder how many died looking beautiful. From the smooth porcelain of powdered faces, we descend into the itchier truths just below the surface, quite literally. Powdered wigs may have crowned royalty with curls and grandeur, But beneath those ivory domes lived entire kingdoms of lice, fleas, and other unwelcome guests. In an 18th century dressing room, the air smells of lavender talc and something sour. A valet carefully lifts a towering wig from its perch, nearly the size of a modern lampshade. He places it gently atop a young duke's freshly shaved head, then pats the curls into shape with a puff of perfume powder. You watch the clouds settle and notice a faint scratching sound. From under the powder, the duke doesn't flinch. These powdered wigs or perukes were not everyday wear for the masses. They were heavy, stiff symbols of status popularized in France under Louis XIV and swiftly adopted across Europe. But the real surprise, they weren't about fashion first. They were often worn to cover syphilitic sores, balding scalps, or the lingering effects of disease. Over time, the wigs themselves became status markers, evolving into towering art pieces curled dyed and decorated with feathers, ribbons, and occasionally vermin. Some wigs were so large that wearers couldn't sit in carriages without bending their necks, and keeping them clean nearly impossible. Historians continue to debate whether people truly ignored the lice or whether they simply surrendered to them. There are records of wig stands being rigged with traps, tiny dishes of honey or wine to lure bugs away from the scalp during sleep. A favored solution was to sprinkle the wigs liberally with powder, often a mix of flour starch and ground herbs. The powder helped hide dirt and grease and provided a faintly pleasant aroma, but it also fed the lice, creating a self-perpetuating colony. You may have heard of rats in wigs. More common were mites and larvae nestled in the warm tunnels of hair. Perhaps the most curious invention of all was the lice stick, a thin rod worn covertly under the wig, treated with mercury or camphor to ward off infestation. Not that it worked reliably. Some wigs were removed weekly for deep cleaning, but others went months. Servants used hot irons boiling vinegar, or even cages of songbirds trained to peck out bugs. The logic: if birds could eat crumbs off a noble's table, they could snack off their scalp too. Surviving illustrations show stylists wearing masks not for fashion, but for protection. The act of powdering a wig stirred up such clouds of irritants that assistants sometimes fainted. Satirical cartoons from the time show powdered nobility, with fleas leaping joyously from their curls. Public jokes even coined the term head banquet. Despite the discomfort, wigs remained in vogue for over a century. Some scholars suggest it was simply too risky to go bareheaded. Others argue that the wigs, while awful to maintain, offered a rare kind of control in a world riddled with disease and hierarchy. So, next time you see a portrait of a duchess in ivory curls or a statesman with powdered poise, look closer. That smug gaze might hide a scalp in agony. And somewhere under those towering spirals, something is still moving. There's something oddly luxurious about not bathing. At least that's what the courtiers of Versailles seem to believe. In the perfumed hallways of Louis XIV's palace, water was not a friend. It was a suspicious element viewed with medical distrust and social disdain. You glide silently through gilded corridors where polished shoes click against marble and the air feels thick with scent, jasmine rosewater, ambergris, and a trace of something less pleasant. Courtiers walk stiffly, their faces powdered, wigs towering, and sleeves stiff with embroidery. Few here bathe with water. Why bother when you can drown yourself in perfume? It's a common misconception that people in the 17th and 18th centuries never bathed. They did, just not often and rarely with full immersion. Physicians at the time warned that hot water could open the pores and invite illness. Bathing was reserved for medical emergencies or spiritual rituals. In Versailles, a full bath might be seasonal, and even then performed with great reluctance and ceremony. Instead, they wash selectively hands, face, perhaps armpits with linen cloths dipped in scented alcohol or vinegar. The French called it dry bathing. The logic was simple: avoid disease by not letting water touch the skin too often. Ironically, this meant filth was hidden rather than removed, but appearances immaculate. Perfume vendors became as vital to court life as jewelers or tailors. Some nobles wore scent-saturated gloves or stitched fragrant herbs into their cuffs. Musk, civet, myrrh all combined to create aromatic auras designed to mask every trace of the human body. Some even carried pomanders, little jeweled balls filled with strong-smelling resins to ward off stink and sickness alike. Historians still debate how bad the smell truly was. Letters from foreign ambassadors describe Versailles as dazzling yet oppressive a place where beauty sat on top of rot. But many contemporaries didn't complain. They were used to it. Some even preferred it. Olfactory fatigue made the odors less noticeable, especially when everyone around you shared the same bouquet. One surprising aspect of Versailles hygiene was the reliance on footmen for scent control. Servants were assigned to carry perfumed handkerchiefs and wave them gently as nobles passed by. Some aristocrats employed smellers, yes, real people paid to sniff clothing and identify which garments were still wearable. Others burned pastilles, tiny incense pellets under their chairs to perfume the air while they gossiped or played cards. Public baths had long since fallen out of favor, associated with disease and lower-class behavior. Even private tubs, when used, were more symbolic than functional. Queen Marie Antoinette famously had a bathing suite, but it was more a performance space than a place for actual cleanliness. She might sit in rosewater while attendants sang or read poetry. And yet, among all the powder scent and pageantry, a curious paradox emerged. The court obsessed over appearances, silken robes, flawless skin, rigid etiquette while ignoring the slow buildup of physical grime. You wonder, did they ever notice, or was perfume strong enough to disguise even their own discomfort? It's said that to enter Versailles was to smell like a garden, but gardens rot too when you stop watering them. Earlier you inhaled the layered perfumes of Versailles. Now follow the trail of strange beauty deeper into the sun-scorched courtyards of ancient Egypt, where the air is thick with incense, and something a bit more unsettling. Here in the hush of the royal harem, beauty rituals unfold beneath palm-shaded alcoves. Sandstone walls trap the desert heat, and alabaster jars line the shelves brimming with unguents oils, and one that draws your eye with a grim curiosity. A servant unscrews the lid, revealing a paste as dark as soil, pungent and oddly familiar. It's crocodile dung mixed with natron and oils. The queens believed it could protect their skin from the brutal Egyptian sun. Yes, dung. Crocodile dung specifically gathered, dried, and processed into a sort of sunscreen/skincare treatment. Why? Because the reptiles were sacred, associated with Sobek, the god of strength and fertility. The logic, while unproven, was deeply spiritual. If crocodiles bask in the sun all day and thrive perhaps, their waste contained the same protective magic. And while it sounds absurd now, ancient Egyptian medical texts like the Ebers Papyrus contain numerous recipes that include animal waste for medicinal or cosmetic use. Dung was believed to hold purifying or strengthening properties depending on the source. Some formulas even combine dung with honey or milk, hoping to balance the stench with sweetness and soothe the skin. Some scholars remain divided on whether these treatments were truly effective, symbolic, or somewhere in between. There's no clear evidence that crocodile dung protected against UV rays, but it may have created a physical barrier against the sun, much like mud or clay. And since many of the elite stayed indoors or under canopies, the appearance of effort may have mattered more than the result. The routine wasn't done in isolation. It was accompanied by chance-scented oils and precise movements. Beauty here was sacred theater, ritualistic and reverent. The women of the harem, often from noble or foreign families, practiced these routines not just for themselves, but as part of preparing for potential visits from the pharaoh. Skin needed to glow, ideally like polished gold. But there were other side effects to these beauty efforts. Some women suffered skin rashes, irritation, or infections perhaps from improper cleansing or chemical interactions. Remedies included everything from lotus-based ointments to magical amulets thought to restore balance and repel bad spirits. After all, when medicine, magic, and cosmetics are one and the same, treatment becomes a matter of faith. One overlooked detail, crocodile dung, was not always applied directly. Some sources suggest it was used in satchels placed near the skin like an aura of protective funk rather than a facial cream. Others claim it was part of ceremonial cleansing, removed after a short duration. But the image remains queens of one of history's most sophisticated civilizations, willingly incorporating reptile waste into their beauty rituals. And in the quiet of the harem, as servants fan the humid air and the sun flickers against limestone, you wonder what other secrets lie hidden in these alabaster jars. How many of them, like this one, carry the scent of something half-believed and wholly unpleasant? You've tiptoed past jars of ancient dung, now shift your gaze north to a darkened Venetian chamber where mirrors flicker with candlelight and beauty hides in the eye, quite literally. Here an Italian noblewoman prepares for a masquerade, her reflection calm but expectant. A servant offers a small glass vial. She tilts her head back, opens her eyes wide, and lets a single drop fall. It burns instantly. The potion inside, a tincture of belladonna and mercury, used to dilate the pupils for that fashionable, wide-eyed, dreamy look. The name belladonna means beautiful woman, and in Renaissance Italy, it wasn't just a metaphor, it was a necessity. Women with large pupils were thought to appear more alluring, innocent, even virtuous. What irony poisoned for purity. Belladonna is derived from the deadly nightshade plant, Atropa belladonna, which contains atropine and alkaloid that blocks nerve signals to muscles. A single drop could widen the eyes dramatically, giving the user an almost doll-like expression. But there were consequences: blurred vision, headaches, light sensitivity, and over time, permanent blindness. Some records suggest the effects were short-lived and used only on special occasions, feasts, court visits, or seductions. Others imply regular, even daily use. Historians disagree on the frequency, but the risk was undeniable. Mercury, sometimes added to intensify the effect or extend shelf life, made matters worse. Its toxicity compounded the danger, leading to nerve damage, tremors, and vision loss. Yet the practice persisted for centuries. Why? Because beauty trends don't always make sense. Some scholars argue the large pupil look signaled emotional openness, even fertility traits prized in courtship. Others suggest it created a sense of mystique or vulnerability, particularly under low candlelight, where shadows deepened and details blurred. And it wasn't limited to Venice. In Milan, Florence, and even parts of France, similar concoctions circulated among noble women and courtesans. Recipes varied, but the goal remained the same: transformation of the eye from tool to trap. One Venetian poem even praised eyes like moons lit by sorcery, a likely nod to belladonna's effects. Physicians were not blind to the risks. Medical texts from the period warn against elixirs for vanity, urging moderation or complete avoidance. But those warnings, like many others in history, were easily ignored in favor of fashion. After all, when the Duchess looks at you with moon-wide eyes trembling slightly in the candlelight, who questions the price? The detail that lingers, though, is this: users had to reapply frequently. The dilation faded after a few hours, requiring another dose. So, women carried tiny bottles in their sleeves, or fans discreetly refreshing their glamour mid-conversation. And all the while, their vision slowly declined. Some wore darker veils to shield from sunlight. Others simply accepted the gradual blur as part of aging. As you stand in that flickering room, watching another drop fall into another eye, you can almost feel the sting yourself. The noblewoman blinks rapidly, then smiles. Her eyes, now vast and glistening, capture the room. They say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but sometimes it's just poison hiding in plain sight. From dilated pupils to painted veins, the pursuit of beauty has always flirted with the uncanny. In some eras, the goal wasn't to look lively, but to seem just barely alive. Slip now into a Georgian drawing room, where pale cheeks, dark-rimmed eyes, and faintly visible veins weren't signs of illness. They were the latest fashion. You notice her immediately, the woman in the corner, reclining with studied fragility. Her skin is powdery white, her eyes shaded with charcoal to create a sunken, melancholic effect. And across her forehead and neck, painted blue veins trailing delicately like river tributaries. She looks like porcelain chipped, maybe even haunted, but never healthy. This was the sickly chic of 18th century Europe. A look cultivated to suggest refinement, delicacy, and romantic melancholy. The trend emerged alongside the rise of romantic literature, tuberculosis poetry, and the noble idea of suffering beautifully. To appear too robust was almost vulgar. Instead, pale translucent skin, dark circled eyes, and a visible network of veins were signs of noble sensitivity. It wasn't just makeup. Women drank vinegar to dull their complexions, avoided sun at all costs, and used white powders laced with starch chalk and occasionally lead. To enhance the illusion of fragile skin, some even traced veins with blue grease paint or watercolor. The effect was most striking under candlelight, where shadows played tricks, and every gesture appeared a sigh away from collapse. Some scholars remain puzzled by how widespread this aesthetic became. Was it a subtle rebellion against expectations of vibrancy and fertility, or simply a way to romanticize wealth through idleness and visible fragility? After all, only those who didn't work outdoors could afford to look like porcelain dolls. Belladonna from the previous section often made a return appearance here, its pupil-dilating powers contributing to the glassy-eyed, haunted gaze. Add to this a touch of rouge on the cheeks and a faint tremble in the hands, and you had what was sometimes called consumptive beauty. Not a flattering term, but one women aimed for nonetheless. This aesthetic had literary roots, too. The heroines of Gothic novels and tragic romances were often pale, wan, and perpetually on the verge of fainting. These characters didn't just reflect fashion, they created it. Real-life women adopted the look of fictional suffering as a form of silent performance. Makeup became a narrative, a gesture toward poetic despair. And yet, underneath the powder and paint, there was often real suffering. The lead in whitening agents caused headaches and skin erosion. The vinegar drinks disrupted digestion. Some even developed anemia from dietary restrictions aimed at preserving their delicate look. But these effects only reinforce the illusion. The weaker they appeared, the more perfectly they fit the aesthetic mold. There is no scholarly consensus on whether men admired or merely tolerated this fashion. Letters and diary entries show a mix of fascination and confusion. Some praise their wives' ghostly glow, others worried about their health, but few dared challenge the trend it was as embedded in courtly life as etiquette or dance. And so you watch her reclining, half-lidded, fragile as lace. The painted veins shimmer faintly in the candlelight, and for a moment you wonder, where does performance end and illness begin? From chalky cheeks to painted veins, now you drift further east to the soft glow of paper lanterns in Edo period Japan. Here, in a quiet wooden house nestled between narrow city alleys, a different kind of ritual unfolds. A geisha kneels before a lacquered mirror. Her kimono pools like silk water, and her face is serene as she lifts a tiny spatula of pale cream, the key ingredient, nightingale droppings. Yes, bird waste, known as uguisu. No fun, it was prized not despite its origin, but because of it. Nightingales particularly, those fed a specialized diet of rice. Bran and seeds were said to produce waste rich in natural enzymes that softened and brightened the skin. Dried, powdered, and carefully sterilized, it was mixed with water into a paste, then gently applied to the face like a mask. It was more than a quirk, it was a cultural expression of balance between nature and beauty. Geishas renowned for their poise and presentation embraced uguisu no fun as part of their meticulous grooming. The treatment was believed to remove dead skin cells, diminish blemishes, and impart a porcelain glow essential for their highly ritualized public appearances. Researchers today note that nightingale droppings contain guanine and enzymes like urea, which can indeed act as natural exfoliants. Whether the results were as miraculous as claimed remains debated. Some historians argue the practice had a placebo effect, supported by centuries of tradition. Others suggest there were genuine cosmetic benefits, albeit accompanied by the less than romantic reality of sourcing bird droppings in quantity. This wasn't just limited to geishas. Samurai families and wealthy merchants also adopted the treatment, believing it brought honor and refinement to the household. Special birdhouses were constructed to farm the birds hygienically, ensuring their droppings were free from contamination. Once processed, the powdered waste was packaged and sold in elegant containers, luxurious despite the contents. The process of application was ceremonial. The paste was warmed by hand spread with small brushes or fingertips left to dry, and then rinsed off with warm rice water. The scent was faint, earthy, almost sweet, thanks to the diet of the birds. And once the face was clean, layers of rice powder and red pigment followed, completing the transformation from human to living artwork. Some geishas whispered their own variations, adding crushed pearl green tea powder or plum extract to the mix. But uguisu no fun remained, the secret star passed down through apprenticeships like a sacred technique. There's even speculation that kabuki actors used it too, though records blur the lines between tradition and marketing. No scholarly consensus exists on exactly when this practice began. Some trace it to the Heian period, others to the Edo boom in urban beauty culture. What's clear is that it persisted for centuries, embraced without shame, even when European travelers found it baffling. Now, watching this quiet ritual, you begin to forget the origin of the mask. All you see is the shimmer of skin under candlelight, the grace of careful hands, and the soft hush of pride in every movement. Not all beauty hides filth, sometimes it transforms it. From bird droppings in Japan, we move southwest to the spice-scented boudoirs of Mughal harems and North African palaces, where beauty whispered not of poison, but of plants. Here, the air isn't sharp or chemical. It's warm, herbal, and familiar. Henna stains fingertips in earthy red kohl lines, the eyes like velvet shadows, and clove water cools the skin with a kiss of spice. You find yourself in a sun-dappled courtyard where women sit in quiet circles, legs tucked beneath embroidered silk. A young bride giggles as her hand is painted with henna, the orange-brown paste slowly drying into intricate patterns. It's not just decoration, it's protection. In many parts of India and North Africa, henna was believed to cool the body, ward off evil, and bring blessings to major life events. Unlike the toxic tools of European beauty, these rituals nourished. Henna derived from the Lawsonia inermis plant not only stained the skin, but conditioned the hair, soothed burns, and reduced inflammation. It was cooling in summer, symbolic in weddings, and a nightly ritual for many women. The scent, earthy, faintly metallic, was associated with joy. Kohl, too, served both aesthetic and medicinal roles. Made from ground minerals like galena or antimony, It was applied with thin sticks to the waterline of the eyes. In Mughal and Egyptian traditions, it wasn't just about allure, it was believed to protect against sun glare, evil spirits, and infections. Modern researchers debate whether kohl had genuine antibacterial effects, or whether its benefits were more psychological. Either way, it gave eyes a sultry gravity that poets could spend pages describing. And then there was clove water, a refreshing, fragrant rinse made by steeping cloves in rose water, or milk. Used across the Islamic world and beyond it, soothed the skin, reduced inflammation, and left a warming scent that lingered like a promise. It was often splashed on the face before bed, or after cleansing a gentler cousin to today's toners. Some historians argue that these beauty practices weren't simply cosmetic, they were spiritual and social. In Indian bridal traditions, the depth of henna color was said to reflect a husband's love or a mother-in-law's warmth. In Moroccan culture, communal henna nights were occasions of music, laughter, and shared wisdom. Beauty here was a bond, not a battleground, and the tools, not lead spatulas or mercury droppers, but carved wooden applicators, delicate brushes, and little brass tins tucked into velvet pouches. These items were heirlooms passed down between generations, wrapped in memory and meaning. There's little scholarly debate on the longevity of these routines. Many survive today celebrated rather than condemned. Brides still wear henna. Kohl still lines the eyes of children and grandmothers alike, and clove water. Now bottled, branded, but still quietly powerful. As you rest in the shade beside these women, the laughter and scents settle around you like a lullaby. No masks, no poisons, just herbs, minerals, and the soft rustle of silk in the wind. Here, beauty doesn't sting, it soothes. Now, drift west once more into a Roman villa where sunlight spills through alabaster windows, warming the tiled floors and illuminating a low marble basin. A woman kneels beside it, stirring a small bronze bowl filled with thick cream. Beeswax, olive oil, and rosewater blend together, slowly forming a substance so soft it seems to breathe. This is cold cream, one of antiquity's most enduring beauty secrets. You've likely heard of it before, but not like this. Cold cream wasn't invented for vanity alone. It was practical, luxurious, and surprisingly advanced. The recipe attributed to the 2nd century Greek physician Galen combined emulsifying beeswax with rich oils and water to cleanse and moisturize skin in a time when soap was often too harsh. The result was a creamy salve that stayed cool even in the Mediterranean heat, hence the name. In a time before modern chemistry, this concoction was nothing short of genius. The beeswax acted as an emulsifier, binding oil and water into a stable mixture. Roman women, particularly in wealthy households, applied it after bathing or before sleep. It softened sun-chapped skin, removed makeup, and with added rose or myrrh, left a faintly floral scent that clung through the night. Cleopatra, though better known for her milk baths and dramatic eyeliner, may have used a version of this cream. Accounts of her beauty rituals often blur fact with fable, but ancient writers mention preparations involving beeswax, almond oil, and crushed petals. Whether she invented them or simply popularized them remains debated. Some scholars believe Roman women adopted and refined Egyptian beauty knowledge, blending it into their own routines with equal parts admiration and appropriation. But cold cream wasn't just for royalty. Small clay pots containing remnants of similar emulsions have been found in the ruins of Londinium and Pompeii, suggesting that women across the empire, perhaps even merchant wives or educated slaves, had access to this daily luxury. Quirky detail. Some Roman creams included white lead or tin ash for added brightness, a nod back to our earlier tales of pale perfection. Not every jar was harmless. Beauty once again walked the line between care and risk. Yet cold cream endured. It outlasted empires, surviving through Byzantine, Islamic, and medieval adaptations. Apothecaries copied and sold versions throughout the Middle Ages. Even today, modern cosmetic formulas still borrow from its structure, oil water emulsifier. The basic idea never left us, it's simply rebranded. Historians still debate Galen's exact formula, as translations vary. Some insist it included vinegar, others that it was thickened with starch. But all agree on its cooling sensation, its elegance, and its quiet power in a world without refrigeration, preservatives, or synthetic fragrances. Back in the villa, the woman leans over her bronze mirror. She dabs the cream gently onto her cheeks, massages it into her temples, then wipes away the residue with a soft linen cloth. The room smells of honey and herbs. Her face glows not from powder, not from paint, but from something simpler. You sit silently beside her, watching as a ritual older than most religions unfolds without ceremony, without spectacle, just care and coolness. From the gentle balm of beeswax and olive oil, we stumble into something far more unsettling. Picture a Victorian parlor chintz curtains drawn to filter the gray London light, a porcelain teacup trembling in a young lady's hand. She looks radiant, glowing almost. But her secret lies not in powder or cream, but in the tiny white pill she swallows each morning. Arsenic. Yes, arsenic, better known today as a poison, then marketed as a beauty enhancer. By the 19th century, it had become an open secret among fashionable women, touted for its ability to produce pale, luminous skin. So-called complexion wafers and arsenic complexion drops were sold openly in apothecaries. The idea was simple. Arsenic slowed the skin's pigmentation and reduced the appearance of blemishes. It made one appear ethereal, delicate, and slowly, subtly ill. And it wasn't entirely pseudoscience. Arsenic does interfere with melanin production, and in small doses it can reduce inflammation. But the price was steep. Users experienced nausea, dizziness, hair loss, and eventually organ failure. Still many persisted, caught between Victorian ideals of beauty and the risk they quietly swallowed. There is no scholarly consensus on how widely arsenic use spread. Some researchers argue it remained a niche trend among the upper classes. Others believe it trickled down through society, especially once commercially packaged arsenic pills hit the market. What's certain is that the demand existed, and so did the marketing. Ads promised healthy pallor and flawless skin, complete with glowing testimonials from anonymous ladies of leisure. And it wasn't just pills. Arsenic was also infused into soaps and tonics. One advertisement even boasted a skin elixir as gentle as dew and as invigorating as snowmelt. The irony, of course, was that these products did eventually thin the skin, but not always in flattering ways. Doctors, for their part, were often complicit. Arsenic was already prescribed for conditions like psoriasis or syphilis, so its cosmetic use blurred the line between medicine and vanity. Some physicians warned against long-term use, while others shrugged it off. It was a beauty choice after all, and who were they to argue with fashion? One peculiar practice involved arsenic eating in the Austrian Alps. Peasants were rumored to consume tiny doses regularly to improve their appearance and stamina. Travelers described ruddy-cheeked villagers boasting of stronger lungs and glowing complexions. The truth of these accounts remains debated, but they added fuel to the Victorian fascination with controlled poisoning. Perhaps the most tragic part, even as symptoms worsened, many users refused to stop. The glow was addictive, the compliments irresistible, and when they grew too sick to continue, others assumed they had simply aged or caught some passing illness. Arsenic's slow hand rarely left fingerprints. So here you sit in the parlor's dim light, watching her sip tea with trembling fingers, cheeks flushed with unnatural warmth. No one speaks of the pills in her drawer. No one sees the thin lines around her eyes. They only notice the glow. And isn't that all she ever wanted? From the shimmer of luminous skin, we move towards something more primal, the art of removal. Hair, that ever-persistent marker of time and biology, has long been plucked, sugared, and scorched into submission. Now settle into the warm shadows of an ancient bathhouse where you hear a faint hiss and a sudden yelp. Beauty once again is screaming softly behind a curtain. The rituals of hair removal stretch back thousands of years through Mesopotamian palaces, Persian gardens, and Mughal harems. Unlike the poisonous creams of European courts, these methods were often natural, but no less excruciating. Threading, sugaring, and fire-based depilation were mainstays of the elite's grooming routine. Let's start with threading, a delicate, brutal ballet involving twisted cotton thread and a very steady hand. It's simple in concept, twist, trap, and pull, but in practice, agonizing. Women in ancient Persia trained for years to master the art, creating patterns as rhythmic and precise as embroidery. Eyebrows were shaped like falcon wings, cheek fuzz eliminated in tight coils, and the upper lip smoothed until it gleamed. All for symmetry, for elegance, for the face to match the poetry. Next came sugaring. In Egyptian and Ottoman traditions, a sticky paste made from sugar, lemon, and water was kneaded by hand, then applied to the skin and yanked off ripping hair from the roots. If it sounds like waxing, it was. But without chemicals and with the added benefit of leaving behind a sweet smell. Sugaring wasn't just tolerated, it was considered a rite of passage. Brides underwent full-body sugaring before marriage, accompanied by music friends and sometimes a shot of wine. There are stories half-joked, half-true of women shrieking loud enough to startle the guards outside. One account from a Mughal chronicler describes a noblewoman demanding her eunuchs hold her down while her legs were sugared. Beauty must hurt, she allegedly said, or it is not earned. Scholars debate whether the tale is factual or satirical. Either way, the message stuck. Fire was also in the mix. In Mesopotamia and early India, depilation sometimes meant singeing. Special tools, coals held between tongs or heated wires, were passed close to the skin to burn away fine hair. A delicate dance of proximity. Too far, nothing happened. Too close, blisters. Some women applied cooling clove oil afterward. Others bore the redness as proof of endurance. Hairless skin meant control over body, over nature, over perception. And for all their suffering, these rituals were rarely spoken of in public. In poems, women's beauty was effortless, their skin like moonlight, their limbs as smooth as silk. No one mentioned the screams, the red welts, or the soft sobs muffled by embroidered pillows. Pain was part of the mythology, but it had no chapter. There is no scholarly consensus on how widespread these practices were across class lines. Some argue they were confined to the elite. Others note that similar tools have been found in commoner households, suggesting a cultural norm rather than a luxury. Now, in the warm, misty silence of the bathhouse, you watch a young woman bite her lip as a thread snaps against her skin. Her face flinches, then smooths, and, slowly, quietly, she begins again. If plucked brows and sugared arms sound intense, brace yourself for something far stranger: wigs that may have once belonged to the dead. In the flickering candlelight of an 18th century boudoir, a hairdresser arranges auburn curls on a polished stand. The locks gleam unnaturally, unnervingly, and while no one dares ask aloud, everyone wonders, where did all this hair come from? Wigs were not a mere accessory. They were emblems of power, hygiene, and theatrical flair. Powdered, perfumed, and piled high, they defined entire eras from the French court to the English judiciary. But the source of the hair remained a mystery best left unexplored. Some swore it came from convents or peasant girls. Others in hushed tones whispered of morgues and graveyards. The truth lies somewhere in between. Human hair was always in demand, and the best kind, thick, uncut, and healthy, was often collected from the poor. Women in rural villages across Europe sold their braids for coins, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes coerced. Hair traders roamed markets offering payment in bread fabric or wine. Locks were snipped, bundled, and shipped to cities like Paris and Vienna, where wig makers sorted, dyed, and assembled them into masterpieces. But those stories of corpse hair, they're not entirely fiction. Some historians point to documented cases where hair was sourced from the recently deceased, especially during times of war or plague. The logic was gruesome, but practical. A body no longer needed its beauty. The temptation to harvest hair from the dead, particularly unclaimed or impoverished corpses, was simply too strong for some wig makers to resist. There's no scholarly consensus on how widespread this practice was. Surviving ledgers rarely admit it, but anecdotal records and satirical pamphlets offer tantalizing hints. One English cartoon from 1765 shows a woman recoiling as her wig sprouts ghostly fingers. Another poem jokes that a widow wore her late husband closer than ever, now upon her brow. Wig hygiene, as you might guess, was another concern. Lice thrived in dense curls, and cleaning was a delicate process. Wigs were brushed with fine powders and oils, then fumigated sometimes by hanging them over burning herbs. Still, many owners suffered from constant itching scalp sores and the peculiar shame of scratching during a royal audience. To mitigate suspicion, wig makers invented euphemisms. Hair from corpses became night-sourced. Hair from prisons was called institutional stock. One shop in London claimed its products were harvested exclusively from willing donors of the countryside, a phrase so vague it could mean anything, or nothing. And yet, the wigs remained, worn with pride powdered to perfection and styled like architectural feats. They towered with ships, birds' gardens, whole narratives perched above the head, woven into curls that may have once belonged to a stranger or a soul long buried. You sit quietly now, watching the woman examine her reflection. Her wig is flawless, her expression serene. But beneath the layers of powder and paste, you see her fingers twitch just once near her temple. A single thought passes through her mind and yours, whose hair is this? You've stared into the unsettling elegance of borrowed wigs, now shift your gaze lower to the smile. Not the sparkling white Hollywood kind, but one dyed black polished with soot, or even lacquered like fine wood. In medieval Japan and beyond, dark teeth were beautiful. Gleaming, yes, but in obsidian, not ivory. This practice, known as ohaguro, was more than cosmetic. It was a mark of maturity, fidelity, and social status. You enter a small chamber of a Heian noblewoman's estate, where incense coils in the air, and a low basin holds a tar-like liquid. A young woman leans forward, dipping a fine brush made from horsehair into the mixture. She grins, already faintly stained, and begins to paint her teeth one by one. The dye itself was made from iron filings dissolved in vinegar, or tea, often mixed with tannins from gallnuts. It had a pungent metallic tang, and required regular application to maintain the inky shine. In Japan, it was first adopted by aristocrats, and later became widespread among samurai families, courtesans, and married women. White teeth, after all, were considered animalistic, something primal, unrefined. Some historians believe ohaguro also served as a practical tool. The iron compound may have helped prevent tooth decay, acting as a protective seal. Modern researchers still debate the dental benefits, but anecdotal evidence suggests it was effective in preserving teeth well into old age. The irony. What looked terrifying to Western visitors may have been one of the earliest forms of preventative dentistry. The fashion wasn't exclusive to Japan. In parts of Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands, similar practices existed using soot beetle nut or other plant-based pigments to stain the teeth black or red. The meanings varied in some cultures. It denoted nobility. In others, spiritual protection or erotic allure. Missionaries and colonial officials, of course, found it repellent, another case of beauty misunderstood across borders. But back to the Heian court, where teeth blackening was part of a larger ensemble. Women wore layered silks in carefully coordinated colors, styled their hair into floor-length waves, and perfumed themselves with incense-soaked robes. A white powdered face framed by jet black teeth created a striking contrast meant to highlight refinement and composure. The effect was haunting, mesmerizing. It turned the mouth from a place of laughter or appetite into a silent emblem of elegance. The ritual of ohaguro was not rushed. It was done in private, often with the help of attendants. Recipes were passed down like heirloom jewelry. Some women even had dedicated trays, brushes, and iron pots for their nightly staining routine. And though it left a lingering metallic taste, many described it as calming, a quiet time to reflect and prepare for sleep. There is no scholarly consensus on why the practice faded. Some say it was the rise of Western influence during the Meiji Restoration. Others argue it declined as health and hygiene standards evolved. But a few women in rural areas kept the tradition alive into the 20th century, quietly resisting the march of modernity with every obsidian grin. And as you watch the noblewoman smile, teeth like lacquered pearls, you wonder, is beauty always about shine, or can it be found in the shadows? From blackened teeth to hollow eyes, we now pass into a dim, velvety chamber, shrouded in silence, the beauty of grief. In 19th century Europe, mourning wasn't a mood. It was a uniform, a code, and for many women, a lifestyle. Cosmetics didn't stop when loss arrived. They simply adapted, becoming pale, somber, and steeped in ritual. You find yourself in a narrow bedroom, lit by a single oil lamp. A widow sits before a small mirror. Her skin is powdered ghost white, her eyelids shadowed with smudges of gray and charcoal. Her veil, dense black crepe, trails like a mourning shroud across her shoulders. She dips a fingertip into a tiny pot of violet salve and presses it gently beneath each eye. This is not vanity, it's etiquette. Victorian mourning culture, especially in England and parts of France, was obsessively codified. After the death of a husband or parent, a woman was expected to wear full mourning for a set period, usually 2 years. That meant black clothing, heavy veils, and, yes, altered cosmetics. A bright lip or flushed cheek would have been scandalous. Instead, pale skin and dark-ringed eyes conveyed appropriate sorrow. Beauty became theatrical, but subdued. Some women used cold cream laced with soot or violet pigment to create the illusion of tears long shed. Powders were chosen for their dull finish. No shimmer, no gloss. Eyebrows were thinned or left unruly. Even scent was muted. Strong perfume was considered disrespectful, replaced by lavender or rosewater in the most diluted form. Historians still debate how strictly these beauty rules were followed outside of the elite. Middle-class women certainly felt pressure to conform, and mourning guides, yes. Actual books circulated widely, offering instructions on what to wear, how to behave, and how to grieve properly. Some critics mocked the system as performative. Others saw it as a source of structure and chaos. And there were variations. In Spain and Italy, mourning cosmetics leaned darker, with fuller black veils and cold eyes. In America, post-Civil War, grief spawned an entire industry of mourning supplies, from black buttons to mascara made from ash and wax. Widows were expected to maintain a look of spiritual suffering even as years passed. The longer the grief showed on the face, the more sincere it was believed to be. There is something deeply strange and quietly moving about a society that demanded beauty even in despair. Mourning makeup wasn't meant to attract. It was a visual echo of emotional loss. Women wore their heartbreak like armor powdered and perfumed. It told the world I am changed. Do not look too closely, or maybe, please do. Some mourners went further, incorporating hair jewelry into their routine. Lockets filled with a loved one's strands or rings woven with braided hair were worn alongside the cosmetics. Death was not kept at arm's length, it was integrated into the self. And now you watch her apply one last dab of pale powder, adjust the veil, and rise. She does not cry, she does not smile, but every gesture, every shadow on her face speaks of someone lost, and a beauty shaped by sorrow. From veiled sorrow to radiant resilience, you now drift toward lands whose beauty secrets were rarely written down, but always remembered. In the humid forests of West Africa and the salt-swept beaches of Oceania, beauty wasn't a commodity, it was ceremony. A daily rhythm embedded in kinship plants and sun. You sit quietly under a wide-leafed canopy where women press shea nuts into paste with the slow confidence of those who've done it for centuries. The result? Shea butter is thick, warm, and fragrant with earth and wood. A young girl laughs as her mother smooths it into her arms and face part skincare, part lullaby. This is not a royal court or a harem. It's a village, a family, a memory. In West African communities, shea butter has long been central to skincare, rich in fatty acids and vitamins. It soothed burns, moisturized sun-exposed skin, and was believed to enhance fertility and feminine strength. Mothers passed the knowledge down, like stories how to store it, how to blend it with camwood powder for deeper glow, when to use it before marriage or childbirth. But it wasn't only practical. It was spiritual. Beauty rituals often aligned with festivals, rites of passage, and ancestral homage. Young women painted their bodies with ochre or ground charcoal, not for men or mirrors, but to mark transition protection identity. Some used enzu, a soft white clay powder, as a sign of purity and rebirth. It shimmered softly against dark skin, a reverse mirror to the white powders of Europe. Far across the ocean in Polynesian islands and Melanesian coasts, similar rituals bloomed. Women massaged coconut oil into their hair and skin, not only to soften, but to shine in ceremonial dances. Flowers weren't just accessories, they were messages. A hibiscus behind the left ear meant single, the right taken. Worn behind both uninterested or, perhaps, simply powerful enough to choose neither. Tattooing, too, was a kind of beauty ritual. In parts of Samoa, Fiji, and the Solomon Islands, women received facial or body tattoos as marks of maturity, courage, and lineage. The ink made from burnt coconut shell and applied with tools of bone and shell left designs both stunning and painful. Scholars debate whether these practices were purely aesthetic or entirely sacred. The answer, perhaps, is both. There's little written documentation of these rituals, not because they lacked depth, but because they were oral, embodied, and fluid. Colonial records often ignored or dismissed them. But modern anthropologists have begun to trace their complexity, how a paste of turmeric and oil could mean protection, or how the timing of a coconut oil massage mirrored lunar cycles. You sit now among these women, listening not to words, but to rhythm hands patting oil into skin songs, murmured as blessings leaves rustling with permission. There are no mirrors, just laughter, warmth, and the slow unfolding of self. No masks, no poisons, no powders to fake veins or blind the eyes. Just secrets made from trees, smoke, water, and pass through generations like lullabies. And yet, long before the age of empire or colonization, beauty had already taken root in faraway lands where crushed petals and sacred minerals whispered stories of their own. You step into a dusty chamber carved from clay, where warmth clings to the air and something faintly floral lingers under the scent of old earth. This is Sumer, some 4,000 years ago. You aren't in a palace, you're in an apothecary's nook, a cross between a beauty counter and a ritual kitchen. On the low shelf before you sit, a series of round jars, each etched with faint cuneiform symbols. Inside, ancient hands once mixed ingredients with astonishing precision, galena dust for sheen crushed hematite for color, animal fats to bind. They weren't guessing. They had systems. These were not potions born of whimsy. They were practical cosmetics rooted in early science and sacred traditions. You dip a finger into one of the jars, hypothetically, of course. The texture is oddly creamy considering it's been sealed for millennia. This was face cream Sumerian style, a blend of pulverized minerals ash and sweet-smelling oils, likely derived from date pits or cypress bark. Applied gently, it softened skin and masked the smell of daily toil. Possibly. There's no scholarly consensus on the exact uses. Some say beauty, others say ritual cleansing, maybe even both. One fact is clear clay palettes were more than tools. They were declarations. Owned mostly by women of status, these trays served both cosmetic and spiritual purposes, used to paint the face and prepare the body for ceremony. Historians still debate whether certain face marks indicated class marriage eligibility or a divine role in festivals. And the colors? Oh, the colors. Iron red smudges mimicked the flush of health, while coal-black lines protected against glare and evil spirits alike. There's a kind of poetry in how practicality and belief swirled together on the same brush. Even the act of application was meditative. One sat cross-legged, dipping a carved bone wand into pigment tracing the contours of the eyes, while whispering prayers to Inanna, goddess of love. This wasn't vanity. It was devotion layered on the skin like a sacred veil. The scent hits you first, sweet resinous, and slowly growing stronger as you approach. Then a flicker of movement in the lamplight reveals something strange. Cones of wax perched on the heads of banquet guests, glistening like candied hats in the flickering glow. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where perfume didn't come in bottles, it melted down your face. Imagine reclining on a woven mat in a palace courtyard, surrounded by musicians plucking soft chords on lutes while servants drift past with trays of honeyed dates. Everyone's hair is freshly plaited. Everyone smells faintly of frankincense, and atop nearly every head sits a small white cone. It looks like dessert. It's not. These were perfume wax cones, solid lumps of scented fat, or beeswax infused with myrrh, cinnamon, and other costly spices. As the evening wore on, the heat would melt the cone ever so slowly, releasing its fragrance like a living incense burner and trailing oily perfume down the guest's wig or hair. Practical, not especially. Fashionable, undoubtedly. Some scholars suggest they also helped condition the hair. Others think they were mainly symbolic, reserved for the elite or ritual occasions. You reach out to examine one carefully. It's surprisingly heavy. The wax is tinted pale yellow, perhaps with saffron or ochre. Over time, the cone liquefies, leaving a gentle sheen on the scalp and a halo of aroma. Not everyone loved them. Some relief carvings show women wearing delicate nets beneath their cones, probably to avoid the sticky drip into their eyes. Practical elegance or a fragrant nuisance. There is little agreement on who wore them. Regularly, men and women appear equally adorned in tomb paintings lounging amid feasts and funerary rites. The cones seem tied less to gender than to status. Still, no archaeological cone has ever been found intact. The evidence comes entirely from artwork. Historians continue to puzzle over why such a vivid practice left no physical trace. One theory holds that the cones were meant only for the afterlife, depicted as part of an idealized funeral banquet, a scene of eternal luxury. That might explain their conspicuous presence in tomb murals, but complete absence in physical digs. Alternatively, they may have been made of substances too delicate to survive, time-hardened oils, resins, even fig paste. It's tempting to think of these cones as ancient air fresheners, but that misses their deeper meaning. In a culture where scent was linked to purity and divinity, to smell pleasant was to be pleasing to the gods. A cone wasn't just a luxury, it was a spiritual offering that melted onto you, mingling with your skin and intentions. And there's a strange comfort in the image, wax trickling slowly under the stars, music playing, someone laughing quietly in the background. The night is long, the air warm, and you adorned with perfume are halfway between the earthly and the sacred. Not bad for a party hat. Soft brush strokes echo through time as you unravel a scroll from the Tang dynasty. The silk rustles faintly, each character painted with an elegance that suggests not just words, but rituals. You're now inside the cosmetic manuals of 8th century China, where blending the perfect blush was both an art and a courtly obligation. This isn't a bedtime story about vanity. It's a lesson in imperial decorum, bound in crimson ribbon and stored with reverence beside poetry and calligraphy. The manuals don't simply say apply blush. They read more like philosophical treatises. Mix the plum petals with rainwater before sunrise. Test the color on your wrist in moonlight. You begin to wonder, was this about beauty or attunement to nature? Inside the palace walls, these handwritten guides were studied with the same seriousness as etiquette. Palace women, especially princesses and noble consorts, were taught early that their faces must reflect both refinement and restraint. Color choice wasn't arbitrary, a faint pink humility, a deeper crimson festivity. Use too much. You risked appearing bold, too little ungrateful. In a world of nuanced rules, cosmetics became their own coded language. You study a passage about peach blossom cheeks, a technique requiring one to gently tint the cheeks using a brush made from the soft fur of a rabbit's foot. The pigment, a careful mix of crushed safflower rice powder and dried plum blossoms. Sometimes even powdered jade made its way into these concoctions, not for sparkle, but to bestow a cooling property thought to calm the skin and soul alike. There is no scholarly consensus on who authored the most famous of these manuals. Some credit Empress Wu Zetian's court, where scholars and artists were commissioned to write everything from medical texts to beauty protocols. Others believe these scrolls were passed among women, copied in secret, adapted with each generation, a blend of statecraft and sisterhood. What's certain is that these documents treated cosmetics as more than adornment. They linked appearance to morality, medicine, and cosmic balance. To harmonize your face was to harmonize with the Tao. Apply too much, and you disrupted the flow. Forget your routine and you risked inviting disharmony into your surroundings. A curious section even includes makeup for grief. Gray plum, beneath the eye powderless cheek, it reads. A public display of mourning that still required poise because appearances mattered even in sorrow, perhaps especially in sorrow. One note of levity appears in the margins, a sketch of a palace cat pawing at a spilled rouge dish. Whoever the artist was, they took the time to ink tiny streaks of red across the scroll, as if to say beauty may be a ritual, but accidents happen. You close the scroll gently, and for a moment you imagine yourself under a paper lantern mirror in handbrush poised. No crowd, no rush. Just the quiet repetition of strokes, the scent of dried petals, and a window open to plum blossoms outside. A ritual not of vanity, but of care. You smell smoke before you see it, a sharp metallic tang that prickles the back of your throat. Then a whisper of heat, a flicker of orange. Welcome to a Roman salon, circa 1st century CE, where golden hair was the height of style, and sometimes the cause of spontaneous scalp fires. In ancient Rome, blonde hair was coveted especially among women aspiring to the fashionable look of northern Gauls or Germanic captives. The irony. Many of the elite had naturally dark hair, but where nature faltered, Roman chemistry charged ahead, armed with vinegar copper filings, goat fat, and a wildly optimistic attitude toward oxidation. Picture this. You're seated near a brazier, eyes watering, as your stylist applies a thick paste of crushed minerals and acidic compounds to your hair. The goal, bleaching your dark locks into sun-kissed glory. The reality, a smell like burnt pennies and a sizzle that sounds far too close to cooking meat. There's no scholarly consensus on how often these dye disasters occurred, but literary sources from the period mention scorched hair and singed scalps more than once. Some recipes included quicklime or sulfur, which when heated could cause chemical burns. Safety regulations. Not quite a Roman specialty. To speed up the reaction, stylists often expose clients to open flame or intense sunlight, sometimes both. Fashionable women would sit in rooftop terraces, their heads swaddled in foil-like caps or poultices baking for hours, a kind of ancient hair salon/torture chamber. It was not uncommon for a dye session to end in tears or temporary baldness. Still, the obsession with golden tresses persisted. Wigs were imported from northern territories, often made from the hair of enslaved women. These were then styled into elaborate buns, ringlets, and braids. For Roman men, dyed hair could carry a different signal: youthfulness, ambition, or a bid to cover encroaching age. Emperor Commodus was rumored to dust his hair with gold flakes before appearing in public, literally trying to shimmer into divine status. What's more curious is the social commentary woven into these practices. Satirical poets like Juvenal mocked women for their foreign locks and reeking wigs. Yet even as they jeered, the trend spread through every echelon of society. Beauty has always trumped caution. You move to a mirror, polished bronze, slightly warped. Your dyed reflection stares back with defiance and a hint of smoke damage. A servant offers a scented oil to soothe your scalp, perhaps one made from rose petals or almond kernels. It's not much, but it helps. Pain was part of the price. Historians continue to debate whether these dyes were used more for theatrical performance or daily wear. Roman mosaics show blonde goddesses and priestesses alike, suggesting that hair color carried mythological and ritual symbolism, not just fashion value. And yet, in all this charring and bleaching, there's something oddly modern. The lengths we go for, beauty, the risk, the innovation, the occasional singed eyebrow haven't changed much. You smile at the thought, then gently adjust your flaming halo. The torchlight flickers across smooth obsidian, dark as ink, cold as judgment. You're in the highlands of Mesoamerica, where mirrors do not reflect vanity, but power. Here among the Mayans, tattoos and shiny black stones weren't just adornment. They were declarations of identity status, and perhaps something supernatural. You pass into a stone courtyard, where the air hums with incense. A boy sits still as a stela, while an elder leans close, obsidian needle in hand. No numbing agents, just precision ritual chants and centuries of cultural significance. Every dot line and spiral tells a story, birthplace, lineage, achievements, or spiritual patrons. To be tattooed was not a rebellion, it was belonging. Across the courtyard, someone polishes a flat disk of obsidian until it gleams like water at night. You peer into it. Your reflection appears not crisp, but distorted alive. The Mayans believed mirrors like these were more than grooming aids. They were portals, divination tools, even eyes of the gods. Some were placed in tombs to guide the dead. Others were worn on the chest as symbols of rank, catching light during ceremonies and casting glints across the crowd like silent proclamations. There's no agreement among scholars on whether these mirrors were used daily or reserved for ritual. Some argue they were too sacred for mundane use. Others point to burial finds and murals showing mirrors held in relaxed settings, suggesting a blend of the divine and the domestic. The same goes for the tattoos. Designs varied widely between regions and social classes. Nobles might receive elaborate face markings resembling jaguar patterns or celestial maps. Warriors bore symbols of conquests, and some priests carried markings said to offer spiritual protection or perhaps identification to the gods themselves. It's debated whether women were tattooed at all. Some evidence suggests yes, but only in hidden places for fertility or childbirth blessings. What's not debated is the technique excruciating. Obsidian blades sharp as surgical tools were used to prick the skin and embed pigments made from charcoal hematite and crushed plants. There were no second chances. A slip of the hand could mean disfigurement or an unintended symbol. You can almost hear the unspoken pressure in the tattooist's breath. In the corner of the courtyard, a young noble checks his face in an obsidian mirror, adjusting a turquoise earring. His cheek is still swollen from fresh ink. The mirror catches just enough light to reflect his ambition. He's not merely admiring himself. He's measuring how others will read him, what stories his skin will tell at court. You step away, letting the scene settle into memory. The mixture of pain and pride, the glint of stone, the hush of history. These weren't decorations. They were declarations etched into flesh and stone, meant to last beyond the body. And in a way they did. The obsidian mirrors remain still catching light, still reflecting strangers centuries later, offering distorted truths, and maybe glimpses of who you once were. You catch the scent before you see the beard, rich, spicy, almost sweet. Then turning a corner in the shadowy corridor of a temple tomb, you come face to face with a statue of a pharaoh and his magnificent braided beard. Except, spoiler, it's not real. It's oiled, perfumed, and entirely false. In ancient Egypt, beards weren't just facial hair. They were emblems of divinity, authority, and balance. Pharaohs wore long, narrow beards sculpted into thin plaits, often curved at the tip like a question mark. Oddly, many of these kings were clean-shaven beneath. That's right, the beards were props. Glamorous, scented ceremonial props. Picture this: a royal attendant carefully tying a false beard onto the chin of a queen. Yes, queens wore them too. Hatshepsut, Egypt's famed female pharaoh, is nearly always depicted with the same stylized chin ornament as her male predecessors, made from braided fibers or metal and fixed with straps or paste. These fake beards were more than fashion statements. They were masks of godhood linked to Osiris, the god of the afterlife, who was always shown with a divine beard. To maintain the illusion, the beards were often treated with oils infused with frankincense, myrrh, and cinnamon bark. The result was a look and a smell fit for eternity. According to some Egyptologists, specific beard oils were brewed in temple workshops and guarded like sacred formulas. Recipes included not only oils, but resins, crushed herbs, and sometimes honey. Sweet enough to attract attention, sticky enough to hold shape. You watch as an assistant kneels beside a small golden box. Inside are tiny vials, each sealed with wax and labeled with hieroglyphs. One contains kaifi, a famous blend of wine raisins and multiple spices. Another holds a paste described in ancient texts as suitable for the chin of Ra. It's not entirely clear whether this meant daily wear or funerary rites. Some scholars think it was both. The line between life and the afterlife was fragrant and thin. There's a quiet debate in Egyptology circles over just how widespread the practice was. While royal beards were depicted endlessly in statuary, few physical remnants survive. Some believe the most ornate ones were buried with their wearers. Others think they were ritual only worn during processions, coronations, or religious festivals, and then stored away like a crown. But, false or not, the beard conveyed power. To wear it was to declare alignment with the gods, to show mastery over chaos. Even children born to royal households were sometimes depicted with miniature versions implying destiny dripped down the chin. You imagine sitting for your beard fitting. The room is warm. The oil, slightly sticky, is rubbed into your jawline before the braided piece is affixed. It tickles. You look ridiculous. And yet, you smell incredible. A mix of cedar musk and ambition. Outside, the people wait. They aren't just looking for a ruler. They're looking for a sign that the gods still walk among them. You step into the sunlight, chin-high scent trailing. You hear chanting in the distance, steady as a heartbeat, as you step onto the volcanic plateau of the Aztec Empire. The sun hangs low, painting the temples gold and red, very red. Because in this world, crimson isn't just a color, it's sacred, sensual, and sometimes unsettling. You find yourself standing beside a ceremonial table where tiny bowls of lip paint glisten in the morning light. They're made of crushed cochineal insects mixed with beeswax and the occasional drop of something more human. Blood, to be specific. Not for shock value, but as part of a deeply spiritual offering. Aztec lip pigments weren't just cosmetics. They were prayers in paste form. Red represented vitality, fertility sacrifice, and divine favor. Applied to the lips, it could signal readiness for ritual status within society or participation in performance. The line between theater and worship here was thin and always vivid. You peer into one of the containers. It's carved from obsidian, cool and heavy in your hand. Inside, the mixture is thick and almost too bright. Cochineal harvested from cactus-dwelling insects was prized not just by the Aztecs, but eventually by the Spanish, who would export it across Europe centuries later. But here now, it's part of a sacred palette. Across from you, a performer prepares for a dance ritual. Her face is already painted in symmetrical designs, red lips, white stripes across the cheekbones, black pigment ringing the eyes. She dips her finger into the paste and gently traces her lower lip. The gesture is tender, reverent. Some say the red symbolized the breath of the gods. Others argue it echoed the blood of sacrifice, inviting divine attention. As with so much Aztec ritual, modern scholars remain divided on its precise meaning. One theory suggests the pigment doubled as protection, both spiritual and physical. The thick wax base could shield the skin from sun and wind during long ceremonies. Another idea posits that the red-lipped performers were seen as living embodiments of deities, their features exaggerated to mimic the divine. You notice a younger acolyte nearby, hesitating. His pot of pigment has cracked. He pours a single drop of his own blood into the mixture, stirs it with a wooden spatula, and continues painting his lips in silence. The act feels neither gruesome nor theatrical. It's precise, practiced, ordinary even. There's no crowd cheering, no one taking notes. Just a moment of stillness, broken only by the soft hum of chanting and the rustle of feathers on a ceremonial headdress. Later, some of these pigments would be offered directly to the gods, placed in temple niches, or poured onto carved altars. Others would be buried with the deceased lips, painted even in death, to ensure they could speak sweetly in the next world. You step away, the scent of beeswax and resin lingering. This wasn't about beauty as you know it. It was about communication between body and spirit art, an obligation read and revelation. The lips you just watched being painted weren't seeking admiration. They were making contact. The scent of sweat oil and ambition hangs thick in the air. You're now in the gymnasium of ancient Greece, where bodies glisten not with exertion alone, but with carefully applied cosmetic oils. Here, beauty isn't vanity, it's virtue. And to shine like a marble statue is a mark of moral excellence. You wander past a row of columns into an open training courtyard. Muscled athletes grapple throw discus or recite poetry between sets. But before any of that began, each one visited the elliptes, the oil master. This man wasn't just handing out olive oil. He was an artist mixing oils infused with herbs and spices, selecting specific blends depending on the season, the sport, or even the temperament of the athlete. You pause beside one of his jars. The surface is painted with images of naked wrestlers and panthers. Inside, oil steeped with bay leaves, myrtle, or cinnamon. Not just for scent, but performance. Warming oils for cold days. Cooling ones for inflammation. Some added red ochre to tint the skin, making the muscles pop, even in low sunlight. There is no scholarly consensus on whether these oils were purely functional or partly performative. Ancient texts suggest both. Plato hinted at their role in moral conditioning. Aristotle criticized excessive oiling as indulgent. Meanwhile, the public loved it. Oiled athletes were considered paragons living proof that physical and ethical excellence were two sides of the same polished coin. And after the games, the athletes didn't simply wipe themselves off. They scraped. A tool called a strigil, a curved bronze blade, was used to remove the mixture of oil, sweat, and dust from the body. This grimy blend was then collected in small containers. Some say it was discarded. Others claim it was sold as medicine or even as a beauty product. Roman elites later prized it for its supposed healing powers. You watch a young man as he stretches under the afternoon sun, his skin practically shimmering. His trainer adjusts the light to show him off better, an ancient version of gym lighting, perhaps. A fellow athlete teases him for reapplying oil too often, calling him glossomonos, the shiny one. Everyone laughs, and yet no one stops oiling. Nearby, a woman observes from behind a lattice screen. While women weren't allowed in the gymnasia, they knew the rituals well. Bridal preparations often involve similar ointments, sometimes even borrowed directly from athletes. Beauty, like wisdom, move fluidly in this world. There's something oddly soothing about this attention to detail. The rhythm of oiling the limbs, the slow scrape of the strigil, the scent of rosemary and pine in the breeze. It's a ceremony of care, of maintaining harmony between the self and society, between body and ideal. You dip your fingers into a warm ceramic pot and feel the oil run smooth across your skin. Suddenly, the statues around you don't seem so still. They breathe, they sweat, they shine, just like you. A pale shimmer coats the air like a powdered secret. You've stepped into the refined courts of Ming Dynasty China, where one of the most coveted ingredients in beauty wasn't floral or herbal, but mineral. Crushed pearls ground to dust and brushed across cheeks were the silent sparkle of status. You find yourself standing beside a lacquered vanity, its surface cluttered with delicate dishes, tiny bone-handled brushes, and silken cloths. One dish gleams with a pale iridescence. You lift it gently. The powder inside is almost too fine to see, but the way it catches the light like powdered moonlight tells you this isn't rice flour. It's pearl. In the Ming era, powdered pearl wasn't just for aesthetics. It was thought to cool the skin, reduce inflammation, and even promote longevity. Some physicians swore by its medicinal benefits, prescribing it in small doses to be consumed as well as applied. Scholars continue to debate whether these health claims were based on true pharmacology or elegant placebo. Either way, people believed in its power, and belief as always adds luster. The process to create the powder was meticulous. Pearls, usually freshwater, were soaked in vinegar, then dried and crushed with jade mortars until the granules reached a flour-like consistency. The result was added to face creams, blush, and even lip color. You imagine a court lady dipping her brush into the dish, tapping once, then dusting her cheekbones with practiced grace. But pearl wasn't for everyone. It was expensive, restricted to the upper classes and those within the imperial court. To appear pearlescent was to declare yourself above the earthly grind, literally luminous, untouchable, refined. The glow was social armor. You glance at a painted screen nearby, showing a beauty applying her makeup by lantern light. A small caption reads something like, "To shimmer is to be favored." Some believe these ideals were reinforced by the imperial beauty rankings, a quietly brutal system where appearance could determine position favor, even marriage prospects. Not everyone agreed with the practice. A few Confucian scholars criticized the obsession with cosmetic shimmer, calling it a distraction from virtue. Others argued it reflected harmony with nature. If jade could be polished, why not the face? What's perhaps most intriguing is how the pearl obsession traveled. Traders on the Silk Road brought word of the beauty trend as far west as Persia and the Ottoman court. Even European visitors to China recorded tales of shimmering court ladies, though they often mistook the effect for albinism or magical illusion. You lean over the vanity and gently brush a bit of the powder across your wrist. The effect is subtle, barely there, yet oddly arresting. Not a sparkle, but a glow, like you've been lit from within by soft candlelight. You think no wonder this lasted centuries. Outside, a bell rings to mark the evening hour. Another lady enters, robes rustling pearls at her ears and powder at her temples. She doesn't smile. She doesn't need to. Her face speaks status fluently, and tonight it glows with the quiet power of crushed seashells. You lift a drinking cup in Athenian kylix and stare into its shallow bowl. But instead of wine, your eyes meet a painted scene, women in flowing chitons, seated before low mirrors, delicately applying makeup. You've stumbled into a symposium where conversation flowed like the wine, and even beauty tools became part of the social fabric. In classical Athens, cosmetics weren't confined to the private quarters. They appeared in art literature, and even pottery sometimes tucked slyly between scenes of flirtation and debate. The kylix used in male-dominated drinking parties became a subtle commentary space, one where myth, mockery, and admiration all mingled in terracotta. The scene beneath your cup shows a woman holding a small circular compact, applying what might be white lead foundation. Another touches her lips with a slim stick. These weren't idle depictions. They hinted at how deeply intertwined beauty rituals were with identity, class, and gender expectations. To the ancient Greeks, makeup wasn't just enhancement, it was transformation. There's ongoing debate among historians about whether these painted scenes reflect idealized women or real daily habits. Some argue they satirize vanity. Others see them as quiet acknowledgments of skill and self-presentation. After all, it takes technique to layer powder without clumps in the sweltering Athenian heat. You set the kylix down and wander into a room where actual compacts and cosmetic jars are laid out on a low table. They're made of terracotta ivory and sometimes silver, round flat, often with mirrors inside. Traces of pigment still cling to their edges, ochre lamp, black and chalky white. These weren't mass-produced. They were prized possessions. The face powders themselves varied depending on fashion and philosophy. Some Athenians preferred a pale complexion, linking it to wealth and indoor leisure. Others darkened their eyelids with soot or crushed minerals to create definition. Lip color often achieved with red ochre or mulberry juice added contrast. Yet, not everyone approved. Philosophers like Plato warned against excessive cosmetics, equating them with deception. And yet, courtesans hetairai were often renowned for their beauty routines and celebrated for their intelligence and wit. They blurred the line between ornament and orator. One painted vase shows a woman offering a mirror to Eros, the god of love. Whether playful or pious, the message is clear. Beauty holds power, and it isn't always passive. You pause before a fragment of pottery with a curious inscription. Even Helen needed rouge, a sly reminder that even the most beautiful face in myth had help. That perfection, or at least the illusion of it, was something cultivated layer by layer. Outside, the sounds of the agora drift in footsteps, debate distant laughter. But here among jars and painted cups, there's only the quiet ritual of self-assembly. Powder pigment a knowing glance. And maybe if you look closely, you'll spot yourself reflected faintly in that ancient mirror, cheeks flushed, lips touched with dye, part of the endless loop of getting ready, of telling the world who you are, one brushstroke at a time. The candlelight flickers across stone walls lined with quiet shelves. No chatter, no perfumes, no powders, just wax scrolls and the soft clink of a bronze mortar. You've entered a medieval monastery somewhere in Europe where robed monks brew balms in silence. And one of their strangest concoctions, lip salve. It's easy to imagine these men as purely ascetic, immune to worldly vanities. But medieval monks were herbalists, healers, and keepers of forgotten recipes. In cold stone cells, where wind cut through narrow windows, cracked lips weren't just uncomfortable, they could prevent chanting reading or even prayer. Enter the monastic lip balm. You peer over a monk's shoulder. He's melting beeswax into a copper pan, stirring slowly with a wooden spatula. Dried lavender buds wait nearby, along with a pinch of salt and a mysterious green oil, likely cold-pressed from local herbs like sage or calendula. The air smells faintly medicinal, but warm too. Comforting. There's no scholarly consensus on how widespread these recipes were, but fragments have survived in monastic herbals and apothecary ledgers. Some formulas included pine resin goose fat, or even crushed pearls. The ingredients weren't just chosen for effect, they were symbolic. Beeswax represented purity, olive oil, spiritual anointing, and lavender was believed to calm the soul, not just the skin. You pick up a tiny ceramic jar from the table. Its lid is sealed with wax and marked only with a faded cross. The balm inside has solidified to a smooth amber sheen. A single dab on the finger melts instantly, gliding soothing. It's surprisingly elegant, this humble preparation. Some historians believe monks made these salves not just for themselves, but for pilgrims, nobles, even visiting clergy. In exchange, they might receive alms wine or rare herbs from distant lands. One monastery record refers cryptically to a balm for the Lord Bishop's lips, afflicted in winter. Whether the affliction was chapped skin or too much sermonizing, we'll never know. Not all monks approved of such indulgences. Certain orders, particularly the stricter Cistercians, frowned on personal comforts. Yet other abbeys, especially Benedictine ones, took pride in their botanical knowledge. To care for the body, they argued, was to honor the vessel of the divine. Even lips. You watch as another monk wraps a finished jar in linen and places it into a wooden crate alongside bottles of tincture and pressed salves. It's bound for a distant convent where nuns will unpack it with whispered gratitude. Perhaps they too recite psalms with softened lips. Outside bells toll. Evening prayer begins. The apothecary darkens, but the warmth lingers along with the gentle scent of wax and rosemary. In this world of quiet devotion, beauty isn't loud. It's tucked in corners, sealed in jars, passed down through ink-stained fingers. And somewhere, centuries later, someone will find one of these balms in a ruined abbey, still faintly fragrant, still soft to the touch. The monks may be gone, but their lips smooth, soothed, and serenely silent left a trace. You follow the scent of roses down a sunlit corridor lined with mosaics. As the arches open into a courtyard, warm air carries a perfume so delicate it feels like breath itself. Welcome to Al-Andalus, the golden era of Islamic Spain, where rosewater wasn't just fragrance, it was philosophy. In this world, scent was a science. Physicians, poets, and perfumers worked side by side, distilling oils not merely for beauty, but for balance. You step into a tiled apothecary where copper alembics bubble quietly over gentle flames. A young scholar carefully adds crushed damask petals to the still, then seals the top with clay. Rosewater is being born not simply extracted but transformed. To outsiders, it may seem like luxury. But in 10th century Cordoba or Granada, scented elixirs were part of daily life and deep ritual. Washing with rosewater cleansed more than skin. It signaled spiritual readiness, physical hygiene, and social grace. Some mosques kept urns of it near the entrance. Some physicians used it to treat fevers, melancholy, or sore eyes. There is scholarly disagreement on whether the earliest rosewater distillation in Al-Andalus came directly from Persian texts or through North African intermediaries. What's certain is that Andalusian scholars improved upon it. They developed techniques for double distillation, longer steeping, and herbal blending methods recorded in treatises like Kitab al-Tazrif, a 30-volume medical encyclopedia that also detailed cosmetic recipes. You lean closer as the apprentice opens a ceramic jar labeled in Kufic script. The liquid inside is pale and cool to the touch. A whisper of rose clings to your fingers. Mixed with saffron or sandalwood, it could become face tonic. Added to powdered sugar, it became a refreshing drink. Dabbed behind the ears, a subtle promise. Across the courtyard, women in flowing robes pass quietly, their hands glistening with oil. They are not courtesans or queens, just scholars' daughters, mothers, healers. In this time and place, the pursuit of knowledge included beauty. Perfume recipes sat beside algebra and astronomy. To scent oneself was not vanity. It was an acknowledgement of creation's design. One curious document lists a morning facial water used by a poetess known only as Layla. Ingredients: rosewater, cucumber juice, almond milk, and a single petal steeped overnight in moonlight. Whether it worked or not is beside the point. The poetry lies in the effort. Some recipes included bitter orange blossoms, crushed violet roots, or even musk, carefully balanced according to one's mizaj or bodily temperament. A warm-natured person needed cooling scents. A melancholic soul required floral brightness. Scent in this tradition was diagnostic. You pause under a fig tree as the evening call to prayer rises in the distance. A woman refills her bottle at the fountain, mixing rosewater with mint. She catches your gaze and smiles not with her lips, but with the graceful motion of the pour, a silent offering. In Al-Andalus, beauty whispered. It didn't shout. It drifted through the air steeped in intention. And tonight, as the scent of roses lingers long after everyone's gone, you realize not all medicine comes in bitter drafts. Some arrive petal soft. The powder is ghostly white, brittle to the touch, and tucked inside a locket made of bone. You've arrived in colonial America, where the desire for a pale face led some to a macabre ingredient, the ground remains of animals and occasionally humans. You stand in a candlelit dressing room, its walls rough-hewn, the air thick with the scent of starch and chalk. On a small table sit two powder boxes. One is labeled pearl white, though no pearls were harmed. The other is more blunt bone chalk. You lift the lid and see it a fine, dusty substance that clings to the air like fog. Colonial beauty ideals borrowed heavily from European tastes. Pale skin signified wealth and gentility, proof you didn't labor outdoors. But in a world short on imports and long on improvisation, women turned to what they had. And what they had were bones. Cattle bones were most common, burned crushed, then sifted into powder. Mixed with vinegar or rosewater, they formed a paste that could be patted onto the face, shoulders, even hands. Sometimes chalk was added to brighten the blend. But there are whispered accounts never confirmed of wealthier women using powdered human bone said to yield a more refined finish. There's no scholarly consensus on whether these tales are fact or fearful legend. Still, the rumors persisted. One diary entry from the 1700s describes a Virginia woman applying her morning visage with a paste that smelled faintly of the grave. Whether it was poetic flair or accurate reporting is hard to say. What is known, some of these powders contain toxic ingredients like lead or arsenic. Over time, they could eat into the skin, cause tremors, or worse. But beauty, especially when tied to status, has always danced with danger. You watch as a young woman dabs her cheeks with a soft puff. She's preparing for a visit from a merchant family. Her powdered face glows in the candlelight, matte and pale, but under her jawline the skin is raw, perhaps from yesterday's touch-up, perhaps from weeks of accumulated irritation. She adjusts her lace collar, adds a bit of scent to mask the bone dust's earthy aroma, and smiles into a polished brass mirror. These powders weren't confined to women. Some men, especially those in court or diplomatic circles, use similar preparations to present an air of refinement. In portraits, everyone glows with the same ghostly radiance. And yet, the materials used were rarely discussed. Beauty, like status, preferred its secrets buried deep. One scholar argues these powders weren't just cosmetic, they were symbolic. To wear bone on your skin was to assert mastery over nature, even death. Another suggests it was simply practicality spun into ritual. A third wonders if some users even knew what they were applying. You place the lid back on the box, careful not to inhale too deeply. The powder, whatever its origin is, centuries old, but it lingers faint and stubborn, like so many beauty standards, refined, risky, and resting on bones. The beach shimmers under a hot sun, and you follow footprints through the sand until they vanish at a tide pool's edge. Nestled among coral and driftwood lies a delicate object, half sculpture, half toolkit. A seashell hollowed and polished its interior, stained with pigment. You've reached Polynesia, where cosmetics came in colors pulled from the sea. Unlike the powdered pearls of dynasties or the perfumed waxes of empire, the beauty rituals of ancient Polynesian cultures were intimate, practical, and deeply tied to the land, or rather to the ocean. In these islands scattered across the Pacific, cosmetics weren't about transformation. They were about connection, marking the self as part of a greater rhythm. You kneel beside a woman seated on woven palm fronds. In her lap is a shell palette holding red ochre black soot and a glossy resin derived from tamanu nuts. She mixes each carefully with coconut oil, stirring with a fine comb carved from bone. These aren't makeup brushes, they're ancestral tools. Her daughter leans in. A steady hand paints lines across her cheeks and nose, perhaps for ceremony, perhaps for play. The pigments signify many things: age readiness, beauty, or even protection. The designs vary from island to island, family to family. Some are geometric, others swirling like waves. Some are worn daily. Others appear only for birth, marriage, or mourning. There's ongoing debate among anthropologists about how strictly cosmetic these applications were. Some argue they were purely ornamental, passed down like hairstyles or jewelry. Others suggest they had spiritual functions, worn to attract blessings, repel spirits, or express harmony with ocean and sky. You watch as the woman traces a spiral on her own cheekbone, smiling as the pigment sets. It gleams under the sun, dark and wet, then dries to a soft matte. She doesn't check a mirror. She doesn't need to. In this community, beauty isn't performed in isolation. It's a shared memory of tides of ancestors of time. Nearby, a man prepares his own pigment, a bright red blend that smells faintly of crushed hibiscus. He scoops it into a small clam shell, then smears a single line across his brow. It's for a canoe race later today. Not vanity, symbolism, strength, pride. Children dart through the sand with smudges on their foreheads, gifts from older siblings or cousins. Everyone here has painted someone else and been painted in return. You get the sense that these seashell palettes have witnessed generations of stories, love, confessions, partings, reconciliations, all written in strokes of color. One shell you notice has been painted itself. Tiny motifs of turtles and waves line its edges, suggesting that even the vessel of beauty deserves its own adornment. Another shell holds nothing now but a faint pink tint, the ghost of 100 ceremonies. You dip your finger into one just for a moment. The oil is warm from the sun. It leaves a streak on your skin, subtle but certain. You've marked yourself briefly with a tradition that doesn't fade. Not really. It stays in the shell. And in memory, a hiss of compressed air and the snap of latex gloves signal that you're no longer in an ancient apothecary, but a modern lab fluorescent lit and filled with glass cases. Still on the work table before you lies a cracked ceramic jar flecked with residue and mystery. Welcome to the present, where archaeologists and chemists are trying to decode beauty's past, one pigment trace at a time. You peer into the jar's dusty interior, where a faint reddish smudge has resisted time. Nearby, a spectrometer hums softly, scanning the sample. The hope that this humble smear will reveal the ingredients of a forgotten face cream or sacred balm, something last touched by hands thousands of years ago. This isn't guesswork, it's precision science. Through chromatography, mass spectrometry, and ancient residue analysis, researchers now reconstruct recipes once lost to sand and ash. What was once just red powder is now identified as hematite, bound with tallow and pine resin. That sweet smell mentioned in a scroll turns out it's benzyl acetate, the compound that gives jasmine its scent. There's no consensus on how accurate these reconstructions are, of course. Modern scientists can identify ingredients, but not always ratios, application methods, or intent. Was this cream for rituals, flirtation, healing, or burial context often crumbles faster than clay? Still, recreations have begun. Museums now commission labs to replicate ancient Egyptian eye paint, Chinese plum blossom rouge, even Roman skin softeners. Some indie cosmetic brands flirt with ancient formula marketing, though rarely with scholarly rigor. The line between homage and fantasy remains powdery. You step into another room quieter, where a team is carefully heating a sample based on a 3rd century papyrus recipe. The scent of frankincense fills the air, mingled with beeswax and something herbal, possibly spikenard. One researcher murmurs, "This is what Cleopatra might have worn on her wedding day." Another counters are her embalming. A glass case nearby displays the finished recreations. Small jars wrapped in linen or sealed with wax sit side by side with their ancient counterparts. Some shimmer faintly under the lights, others remain stubbornly beige, but they all hum with intent, beauty, survival, status, sanctity. What's most astonishing isn't how complex these cosmetics were, it's how familiar. Moisturizers, exfoliants, hair dyes, lip tints. These aren't modern inventions, they're human constants. Our ancestors didn't just survive, they softened, soothed, decorated, and dared to glow. You lean closer to a jar of replica Mayan pigment. It smells faintly of charcoal and rain. A note beside it reads, "Recreated from cheek tattoo residue found in Temple 12. Somehow the past feels closer than ever, painted not in broad strokes, but in fingertips. The lab falls quiet as the day ends. The machines power down. But in one corner, a student dabs her finger into a test balm, laughing softly. "It's nice," she says, "even if it's 3,000 years old." In a world obsessed with the new, it turns out the oldest things still shine. Perhaps the real secret of ancient beauty was never youth, but memory. Skin, after all, forgets. But pigment remembers. And now the jars are closed, the powders stilled. The scents of rosewater resin and sea salt balm drift into silence. Across millennia, people mixed painted and perfumed their way through rituals not of vanity, but of care. Each compact shell and carved stick whispered something you matter even in dust. You're floating now like a curl of incense through time, past Sumerian clay palettes and Mayan cheek tattoos, past powdered pearls and melting wax, past every soft effort to face the world with color, courage, or comfort. The faces are gone, but the traces remain. And maybe that's the strangest part, that something so intimate, so easily wiped away, could echo so loudly across centuries. If this helped you rest tonight, maybe leave a sleepy emoji, and tell me which forgotten ritual you'd bring back. And if you'd like to return to stories like this, you can always subscribe quietly, of course.